feeling. We're seeing that light at the end of the tunnel, and
it provides light at the end of the tunnel.
The light at the end of the tunnel, vaccines, the manner of...
We're all hoping that there's light at the end of the tunnel.
It feels like there's finally a light at the end of the tunnel, especially...
Today, saying there is a light at the end of the tunnel. And the light at the end of the tunnel for staff and residents here.
However, there is a light at the end of the tunnel.
Light at the end of the tunnel in the quest for coronavirus vaccine here in Central.
Here, he said this is the light at the end of the tunnel. He's confident
the vaccine, which of course is that light at the end of the tunnel for
somewhat of a light at the end of the tunnel.
It's the moment.
Gotta love hearing that there is finally light at the end of the tunnel. Right now, listen,
there is light at the end of the tunnel, but we still have to get through this tunnel.
This could be the light at the end of the tunnel.
If that's...
And they feel there's a light at the end of the tunnel. The tunnel is still dark. Nothing.
And yes, the vaccine is the light at the end of the tunnel. Boy, we are in the thick of it.
There's light at the end of the tunnel, and not just for Brits, but for the world, I think.
There is a light at the end of the tunnel. We're seeing the
light at the end of the tunnel, but our fight.
This is really the light at the end of the tunnel.
Delafontaine. We can see a light at the end of the tunnel for eradicating.
We're all tired, but I'll tell you, we're seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. We've been talking about it all year. We got the...
that can bring some of the light at the end of the tunnel.
Pandemic. There is light at the end of the tunnel.
But he says the light at the end of the tunnel is there.
But there is light at the end of the tunnel with the vaccination programs being...
Yet despite the setbacks, the light at the end of the tunnel seemingly still getting...
I feel like we finally have a light at the end of the tunnel.
The light has started to shine for them at the end of this tunnel.
Light at the end of this crazy tunnel. Everything's been so uncertain.
How will we make sure that the light at the end of the tunnel shines for all?
That ray of light at the end of the tunnel.
Well, we've been reporting about these clinic days for
a tunnel for about 9 months. And to me, the light is at the end of the tunnel now. I can look at...
These vaccines are the light at the end of the tunnel.
There's a light at the end of the tunnel, but we have to remember it's still a pretty long tunnel. And we
vaccinated.
He sees the light at the end of the tunnel. And as
colleagues, this vaccination rate means a light at the end of the tunnel.
It changes every...
Finally seeing the light at the end of the tunnel here in terms of getting this vaccination out.
She feels like there's light at the end of the tunnel.
21 brings light at the end of the tunnel from our perspective.
We can finally see light at the end of the tunnel. Stay healthy.
It's been a long year of heartache, but there is light at the end of this dark tunnel.
Yeah, what a moment, really. It is that light at the end of the tunnel in a way, isn't it? And it, as you've heard from Dr. Harris,
vaccine provided a light at the end of the tunnel. It also sparked
into our arms is increasingly becoming more like the light at the end of the tunnel as it has.
We see the light at the end of the tunnel, but we are still in the tunnel.
That it's hard to imagine a light at the end of the tunnel right now.
There's some hope. Maybe there's a light at the end of the tunnel.
And that optimism.
But there's light at the end of the tunnel, and not just for Brits, but for the world, I think, too.
Mr. Secretary.
The vaccine is on its way. There's light at the end of the tunnel.
Today's it's such a historic day as we hopefully see the light at the end of the tunnel of this horrible pandemic and the
face this year. But now there's a light at the end of the tunnel, and that light is the COVID-19 vaccine.
this is now a light at the end of the tunnel, and so one of...
Better, but there's a light in the end of the tunnel. And that...
But there is a light at the end of the tunnel.
Is that little light at the end of the tunnel we've all been waiting for.
COVID vaccine is light at the end of the tunnel. It's getting brighter every day. We have a long way to go, but we can't...
Pardon Pfizer's clinical trial.
It's a light at the end of the tunnel.
The most recent step.
This is like the light at the end of a tunnel. So I was...
hopefully this is light at the end of the tunnel.
Around the hospital.
There's been some light at the end of the tunnel this week.
I think it's light at the end of the tunnel. I think...
And I mean, what's exciting about this from my standpoint is I think we're in a very dark tunnel, but there is the first light at the end of it now with these two vaccines. And
shows a light at the end of the tunnel. Quickly, will the general population receive it? And could this really be the light at the end of a very long and dark tunnel?
And there is light at the end of the tunnel.
The vaccine is the light at the end of the tunnel. Once you have that vaccine, you have a way of finally putting an end to this virus. If
Trying to see like there's a light at the end of the tunnel, you know, and we're
Tonight, a light at the end of the tunnel. That
All of us. We feel like it's the light at the end of the tunnel, and in that
COVID, they say they see a light at the end of the tunnel.
Toward the light of the end of this long and dark tunnel. And it's worth adding.
In nursing homes, there is a light at the end of the tunnel in the form of a
Clinics say this could be the light at the end of the tunnel.
The light is at the end of the tunnel.
Getting through this and seeing the light at the end of the tunnel.
More so now that you have light at the end of the tunnel, so to speak, you have the vaccine.
Come this far and now to see light at the end of the tunnel. I will be getting the vaccine when my...
Hopefully this is the light at the end of the tunnel that everybody's been waiting for. Back to you guys.
Use the vaccine as a light at the end of the tunnel.
Vaccines. There is a light at the end of the tunnel.
So there is light at the end of the tunnel, as we're fond of saying. But this too.
There's light at the end of the tunnel. There really, truly is.
She said
this vaccine today gives us the promise and the light at the end of that tunnel.
FedEx and UPS.
There is a light at the end of the tunnel, but we are still in the tunnel. So this vaccine.
There's no other way.
Are you optimistic? You see light at the end of the tunnel?
Oh, yeah.
Seems to be a light at the end of the tunnel.
Once we all get vaccinated, we really are, looking at the light at the end of the tunnel.
If anything, now's the time to double down because we see a light at the end of the tunnel.
Sort of on the road through the tunnel with the light at the end of it, we can maybe at least see the light now. And
Long road, but 2021, well, this year there's a very much needed light at the end of the tunnel.
But I'm seeing the light at the end of the tunnel.
Vaccine as the light at the end of the tunnel, if you will.
Kind of that gleaming light towards the end of the tunnel. I know we
absolutely start to see the light at the end of this tunnel.
Arrival of vaccine, there is finally light at the end of the tunnel.
It is the light at the end of the tunnel, but it is still a long, dark tunnel.
Carrying people who say there's light at the end of this tunnel. It's inside the same
tunnel, but we're starting to see that light at the end of the tunnel.
This vaccine.
And this is a light for us at the end of the tunnel to be able to get back to
vaccines that have already been approved and those yet to come. There is a light at the end of the tunnel. But
this is just kind of our first step in a light at the end of this tunnel. It is not.
I think this vaccine today gives us the promise and the light at the end of that tunnel.
Over the last couple of weeks, but despite that, everybody is looking at the light at the end of the tunnel. This is positive.
COVID vaccine. The light at the end of the tunnel, I see it. It's coming, but we need
to take.
I'm wondering if you think that the light at the end of the tunnel, so to speak, is really fast approaching.
Time. It provides light at the end of the tunnel for this pandemic, which we...
this is it, right? Finally, there is light at the end of the tunnel.
Pleased to announce there's light at the end of what has been a very long tunnel.
I think a lot of people are looking at it as the light at the end of the tunnel, right? As you said, there's a lot of hope being.
As far as you're concerned, do we have any visibility as to whether or not there's light at the end of the tunnel at this point?
I think there will be light at the end of the tunnel. We have 4
other patients and other healthcare workers that there is a light at the end of the tunnel, and this is the beginning.
I'm developing immunity to this in December. So I think we are, the light is well and truly at the end of the tunnel now. Now the European...
It is the light at the end of the tunnel, but it is still a long, dark tunnel.
I'm hoping this is the light at the end of the tunnel. I'm confident this is the light at the end of the tunnel.
Important enough to cover just because I can see the light at the end of the tunnel. It's there.
We can now see the light at the end of the tunnel.
3, 2, 1, vaccinate.
Hard to see the light at the end of the tunnel.
And trips and so on. I think we're seeing the light at the end of the tunnel.
And what time do you?
Christmas. But this suggests that there's an end. There is a light at the end of the tunnel. There's an end.
Care workers. Is this finally light at the end of the tunnel, or should?
So, Whoopi, first of all, thank you for having me on. And this is light at the end of the tunnel. This is the beginning.
Real light at the end of the tunnel, and so.
With this vaccine, we see that there's a light at the end of this tunnel.
This is real. There is light at the end of the tunnel. So.
And this is truly the light at the end of the tunnel.
get us back to.
They'd already be vaccinated before the end of December. There is a light at the end of the tunnel.
Visible at the moment, or not all that visible, but there is light at the end of this tunnel, and don't forget that.
To put an end to not give up so soon. There's light at the end of the tunnel, but we still need to continue to wear our masks.
This is the light at the end of the tunnel, but it's a long tunnel.
Enthusiastic that there is light at the end of the tunnel, but mindful that we're still in the tunnel.
A day government officials say is the beginning to the end of the pandemic.
Where finally we see the light at the end of the tunnel.
This morning,
The light at the end of this tunnel is really the vaccination.
On Friday, the Virginia Department of Health announced that
we see the light at the end of the tunnel. We're
continue to be so, but this is our light at the end of the tunnel. If we
and therefore it's absolutely vital that everybody take comfort in the fact that we have light at the end of the tunnel and find the
this does at least show the light at the end of the tunnel.
Well, this is it. I mean, this is certainly the hope. There's always a little.
But there is light at the end of the tunnel. We know.
Saying that this is a light at the end of the tunnel as that
tiered approach. There is light at the end of the tunnel.
Seeing some light at the end of the tunnel.
I think.
Gates was momentarily and understandably shaken, but he was not injured.
Just simple words there, reacting it. You're quite emotional by that.
Oh, it's just, it's been, it's been such a tough year for so many people, and they're
at the end of the tunnel.
I think
it's definitely a big light at the end of the very dark tunnel, as I would say.
For COVID-19, we're beginning to see the light at the end of the tunnel.
The choice is easy. There is light at the end of the tunnel.
Optimistic about finally seeing the light at the end of the tunnel, that COVID-19 may be
hopefully the light at the end of the tunnel by getting the vaccine.
Pfizer and Moderna vaccines. There is a light at the end of the tunnel. I want to share more about how we're distributing those vaccines.
Districts across Kentucky are seeing light at the end of the tunnel in the form of the COVID-19 vaccine.
And it's exciting to see a glimmer of light at the end of a very long tunnel. It's been a long.
There is a vaccine and there's hope. There's light at the end of the tunnel.
Dr. Brownstein, as we've been thinking about the light at the end of the tunnel, two main things that we were hoping for.
Singapore and elsewhere. This could be the light at the end of the tunnel that could hopefully bring up
absolute most vulnerable patients.
Well, I mean, it is an interesting place that we're in right now. I always say we're in this, light at the end of the tunnel mode where we can see the light with the vaccine, but we're in a long tunnel. And
than what we talked about last week. This is the light at the end of the tunnel that we've been looking for. This is how.
With this vaccine, please God, as we begin to see the light at the end of the tunnel, may it come speedily.
Like this, as we hopefully head toward the light at the end of the coronavirus tunnel.
After a long wait, the vaccine has arrived and a light at the end of the tunnel is beginning to shine. The facility will
ensure that we invest heavily in a meaningful and equitable economic recovery. As we see the light at the end of the tunnel with vaccinations.
Vaccinations are now taking place. There is now a light at the end of the tunnel, a shot of hope.
When your place in line arrives, I urge you to get vaccinated. This is the light at the end of the tunnel. It will be enough.
After the second dosage. This is the weapon that is going to win the war. And that is the light at the end of the tunnel, right?
Helping the sickest COVID-19 patients, Lucky says.
This is honestly like the light at the end of the tunnel for a lot of people, including myself. Like, it's just an opportunity that we can.
In the placebo group, I mean, that is huge.
It really is. The tremendous advances finally giving us some light at the end of the tunnel. Dr. Todd Ellern, thanks.
Countries among the worst hit in Europe, but could be the first to see the light at the end of the tunnel. And
nightmare that really maybe there is something, an end to this. There is light at the end of the tunnel.
In Houston this year, there is light at the end of the tunnel.
Day, and this is
a big step, and it's the light at the end of the tunnel for us.
We can work together to mitigate this pandemic. There is light at the end of this tunnel now.
The vaccine today gives us the promise and the light at the end of that tunnel.
FedEx and UPS handling the deliberations
about taking the vaccine. The Pfizer vaccine rolled into the doors of UC Davis today, symbolizing the light at the end of the tunnel of the pandemic.
It just really finally feels like there's maybe a light at the end of the tunnel finally with this vaccine, and I just feel a lot of hope. It's hard to put into words what I'm feeling right now. I'm very, very emotional, very hopeful, very excited. I want to be first in line. I want to be an advocate for every